You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 6,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. My name is Daniel Corvinus, and I'm going to die in 4 weeks. I've known this my entire life, not the way people joke about mortality or fear aging. I mean, I've known the exact date, the exact circumstances, the exact way my body will be found. November 17th, my 35th birthday. Locked room, body twisted in a position that shouldn't be possible, eyes frozen open in absolute terror. It's how every Corvinus has died since 1824. I'm recording this on October 20th, in a small apartment in Vatican City that's been my home since I was 7 years old. If you're watching this, it means I either succeeded in breaking a 200-year-old curse or I died trying. Either way, you deserve to know the truth about what the Catholic Church has been hiding in its deepest archives and what they trained me to become. Let me start at the beginning. Not my beginning, but the real beginning, back in 1824. My ancestor, Father Lucian Corvinus, was a priest in a remote village deep in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. By all accounts, he was a good man, devout, kind, the sort of priest who would walk for hours through snow to give last rites to a dying farmer. The villagers loved him. Children would run to greet him in the streets. Old women would cross themselves and smile when he passed. In March of that year, a wealthy merchant named Petru Dalca came to him in the middle of the night, pounding on the door of Lucian's modest quarters beside the church. When Lucian opened the door, Petru fell to his knees, weeping. "Father, please," the merchant begged. "My daughter. Something is wrong with my daughter." Lucian had known Ileana Dalca since she was born. She was 17 years old, beautiful and kind, engaged to be married to the son of another merchant family. But according to her father, 3 weeks earlier, she'd changed. It started with nightmares. Ileana would wake screaming about things crawling inside her skin, about voices calling her name from the darkness. Her parents thought it was wedding nerves, but then she began speaking in languages she'd never learned. Ancient Greek, Latin, languages that hadn't been spoken in centuries. She knew things she couldn't possibly know, intimate secrets about people she'd never met. Her eyes would go completely black, pupils disappearing into darkness. The local doctor could find nothing wrong. A priest from a neighbouring village attempted a blessing, but Ileana had laughed at him, called him by his childhood name, and revealed sins he'd never confessed to anyone. The priest fled and refused to return. Lucian recognised the signs immediately. He'd studied demonology as part of his training, though he'd never encountered a real case of possession. He'd hoped he never would. "I'll come at dawn," Lucian told Petru, "but I must prepare first. What I'm going to attempt is dangerous, for all of us." Lucian spent the rest of that night in prayer. He gathered the necessary items: holy water blessed by the bishop, consecrated oil, a crucifix that had belonged to a saint, pages from the Bible written in his own hand. He fasted. He prayed until his voice was hoarse, and he wrote in his journal, documenting everything, because he had a terrible feeling that he might not survive what was coming. On the 4th day, he entered the Dalca home. The family was wealthy, their house one of the largest in the village, built from good stone with glass windows and fine furniture. But when Lucian stepped through the door, he felt it immediately. A wrongness in the air. A pressure that made it hard to breathe. The servants had all fled. Only Petru and his wife remained, pale and terrified. Ileana was in her bedroom on the 2nd floor. They'd locked her in after she'd attacked her mother with a kitchen knife. moving with impossible speed and strength. Lucien could hear her as he climbed the stairs, not screaming, laughing, a sound that made his skin crawl. "She knows you're here," Petru whispered. "She's been saying your name for hours." Lucien approached the door. Inside, Ileana's voice called out, sweet as honey. Father Lucien Corvinus, born in Cluj in 1789. Your mother died when you were 12. You've been afraid of the dark ever since. Come in, Father, let me see you. Lucien made the sign of the cross and opened the door. The room was destroyed, furniture overturned, curtains ripped, scratches on the walls that looked like they'd been made by claws. And in the center of it all, tied to her bed with ropes her father had used to secure cargo, was Ileana. Except it wasn't Ileana. Not anymore. Her head turned toward him at an angle that was wrong, vertebrae popping audibly. Her eyes were completely black, reflecting no light. When she smiled, her teeth seemed too sharp, too many. "Hello, priest," she said in a voice that held harmonics, multiple tones layered over each other. "We've been waiting for you." Lucien began the exorcism. What happened over the next 18 hours was documented by Lucien in his journal, in entries he wrote during brief breaks when the entity seemed to rest. The demon fought him at every turn. It made Ileana's body do things that shouldn't be possible, bending backward until her spine should have snapped, speaking in voices of people Lucien had known who were dead, revealing his deepest shames and fears. It told him things about himself he'd never told anyone, secret doubts about his faith, moments of weakness, times he'd failed people who trusted him. The demon scraped at his soul, trying to find a crack, a weakness it could exploit. But Lucien held firm. He prayed, he read scripture, he called upon saints and angels, he demanded the demon identify itself. And after hours of resistance, it did. A name in a language that predated human speech, a sound that made Lucien's ears bleed. The family cowered downstairs, listening to the sounds from above. Ileana's voice screaming obscenities, furniture breaking, the walls shaking as if the house itself might collapse. Villagers gathered outside, some praying, others fleeing in terror. As dawn approached on the second day, Lucien reached the climax of the ritual, the prayers of banishment, the commands to leave the girl and return to the pit. He was exhausted, his voice barely a whisper, but he pushed forward. By the authority of Christ, by the power of his resurrection, by the blood of the martyrs, I command you to leave this child. You have no power here. You are cast out. You are banished. You are... And then Ileana gasped. Her eyes cleared. The blackness receded, and for the first time in weeks she looked at Lucien with her own eyes. "Father," she whispered, "what happened? Where am I?" Lucien nearly wept with relief. "You're safe now, child. It's over." He gathered his things with shaking hands and stumbled from the room. The Dalka family rushed upstairs and found their daughter sitting up in bed, confused but herself again. They embraced her, crying with joy. Lucien left the house as the sun rose. The villagers cheered. They touched his robes as he passed, seeking blessings. He'd saved the girl. He'd defeated the demon. He was a hero. But as Lucien walked back to his quarters, he felt something. A presence. A sensation of being watched. He turned quickly, scanning the street behind him, but saw nothing unusual. Just villagers, going about their morning routines. Yet the feeling persisted. A prickling at the back of his neck. A certainty that something was observing him. He shook it off as exhaustion and paranoia. He'd just spent 18 hours in spiritual combat. Of course he felt unsettled. That evening he wrote his final journal entry. His hand shook as he wrote. Whether from exhaustion or something else, he couldn't say. The girl is saved, praise God. The demon was cast out, and the Dalka family is whole again. I should feel triumphant. I should feel the joy of victory. But something troubles me. As I left the house, I felt eyes upon me. Not human eyes. I turned but saw nothing. Yet, the feeling persists even now as I write this. I have the terrible sense that during the exorcism, in all the chaos and spiritual warfare, something saw me. Something learned my name. Something studied me while I studied it. I feel marked somehow. Claimed. May God protect me from whatever I've awakened. I pray I'm simply exhausted and imagining things. But I've learned to trust my instincts in spiritual matters, and my instincts tell me that this is not over, that something followed me when I left that house, that something is waiting. Forgive me for my paranoid thoughts. I will sleep now and surely feel better in the morning. That was his last entry. 21 days later, on November 17th, other monks found Lucien dead in his cell. The door was bolted from the inside, the kind of heavy iron bolt that could only be secured from within the room. The window was barely large enough for a cat to squeeze through, and it was latched shut. There was no way anyone could have entered the room. Yet Lucien was dead. His body was bent backward at the spine, arched in a bridge position that would have required enormous strength to maintain even for a moment. His arms were twisted behind him at unnatural angles. Fingers clawed into the wooden floor so deeply that splinters had driven under his nails. His face was frozen in an expression of such absolute terror that several monks who saw it had to leave the room to vomit. But the worst part, according to the reports, was his eyes. They were open, staring at the ceiling, but the look in them suggested he'd seen something so horrible that his mind had shattered in those final moments. One monk, who'd been a soldier before taking orders, said Lucien's expression reminded him of men who'd been tortured beyond the point of sanity. The church investigated thoroughly. They examined the room from every angle. They questioned everyone who'd seen Lucien in his final days. They consulted with experts in demonic phenomena. Their conclusion was inconclusive. Possible demonic attack, but no clear evidence. No signs of physical struggle beyond the body's position. No evidence of another person in the room. Lucien was buried with full honours. The investigation was filed away. The church moved on. Until 1845. Daniel Corvinus, Lucien's son, died on November 17th. Age 35, locked room. Body twisted impossibly. Face frozen in terror. Same day, same age, same circumstances. Now the church paid attention. Andre had been a farmer, not a priest. He'd lived quietly in a different village, far from where his father had died. He'd married, had children, lived an ordinary life. There was no reason to connect his death to his father's, beyond the identical circumstances. But the church keeps meticulous records. Someone noticed. Someone made the connection. By 1871, when Daniel Corvinus died in exactly the same way, the Vatican had begun keeping detailed files on the family. They were dealing with something unprecedented, a curse that passed through bloodlines, that killed with precision and purpose, that couldn't be stopped by distance or prayer or any conventional protection. Nikolai had known about his father and grandfather. As November 17th of his 35th year approached, he'd grown desperate. He'd spent his family's fortune hiring occultists, mystics, and spiritual experts from across Europe. If the church couldn't help him, perhaps darker knowledge could. On November 15th, 1871, 5 people gathered in Nikolai's home in Bucharest. Nikolai himself, a mystic from Prague, who claimed to understand ancient binding rituals, a witch from the Black Forest who specialised in curse breaking, an occultist from Paris who'd written books on demonic hierarchies, and a Romani woman who said her grandmother had dealt with similar afflictions. They performed their rituals through the night of November 15th and into November 16th. Neighbours reported seeing strange lights from the windows, hearing chanting in languages they didn't recognise, smelling incense and stranger things. On November 17th, Nikolai's wife returned from staying with her sister. She found the door locked. When she finally convinced neighbours to help her break it down, they found all 5 bodies. Each one was positioned the same way, spine bent backward, arms twisted impossibly, faces locked in expressions of absolute horror. All 5 had seen something together. All 5 had died together. Whatever Nicolay and his experts had tried to do, it had failed catastrophically. The church sealed those case files immediately. This was beyond anything in their experience. A generational curse that not only couldn't be broken, but that lashed out violently at anyone who tried. In 1898, Maria Corvinus became a nun, taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. She lived in a convent in the Italian countryside, surrounded by holy ground, spending her days in prayer and contemplation. The sisters loved her. She was kind, gentle, devoted. On November 17th, 1919, the day she would have turned 35, the other sisters found her dead in her cell. The door was locked from the inside. Her body was twisted in that same horrible position. Her face wore that same expression of ultimate terror. The church brought in their best investigators, exorcists who dealt with the most powerful demons, theologians who understood the deepest mysteries of spiritual warfare. They examined everything. They found nothing that helped. By this point, the Vatican had a thick file on the Corvinus curse. They called it a bloodline tether, a theoretical phenomenon where a demonic entity attaches itself to a family line and uses it as an anchor to remain in our world. The theory was that during Lucien's exorcism, something had gone wrong. Perhaps he'd missed a step in the ritual. Perhaps the demon had been more powerful than he'd realized. Perhaps in his exhaustion, he'd left something incomplete. Whatever the cause, the entity hadn't been banished. It had been disturbed, wounded, forced to leave the girl, and in its rage that it had latched onto Lucien himself. When it couldn't kill him during the ritual because of the protections, it had followed him, waited, and 21 days later, when those protections faded, it had struck. But instead of dissipating after Lucien's death, as a demon normally would, it had remained. The theory was that Lucien's blood, his very essence, had become an anchor point for the entity, and when Lucien died, that anchor transferred to his descendants. The entity was using the Corvinus bloodline as a tether to remain in our world, feeding on them generation after generation. Every 35 years, it would manifest and claim another victim, always on November 17th, always someone who turned 35 that day, always in a locked room, always leaving the body twisted and the face locked in terror. The pattern was perfect, precise, inevitable. In 1956, Robert Corvinus knew what was coming. He'd grown up hearing family stories about the curse. As his 35th birthday approached, he travelled to Rome itself, seeking help from the Vatican directly. 3 experienced exorcists performed a preventative exorcism on him, attempting to cleanse any spiritual taint before the entity could manifest. The ritual took place in a chapel within Vatican City, one of the holiest places in the Catholic world. It was surrounded by relics of saints blessed by 3 different popes over the centuries. If anywhere was safe, it should have been there. Robert died on November 15th, 2 days before his birthday. The exorcists found him in the locked chapel where they'd left him to pray. Body twisted, face terrified, dead. The entity had struck early, as if annoyed by their interference, as if making a point. You cannot stop me. You cannot protect them. They are mine. In 1978, Margaret Corvinus, who would become my grandmother, tried a different approach. She ran. She changed her name to Margaret Westbrook. She moved to Australia, as far from Europe as she could get. She converted to Buddhism, abandoning her Catholic roots entirely. She told no one about her real family, She tried to disappear completely, hoping that if the curse couldn't find her, it couldn't kill her. On November 17th, 1983, her landlord found her dead in her locked apartment in Sydney. Body twisted, face terrified. The entity had crossed the world to find her. Distance meant nothing. New names meant nothing. Different religions meant nothing. The curse was in the blood itself. By 1998, the church had spent over a century studying the Corvinus curse. They documented every death, consulted every expert, tried every solution they could conceive. Nothing worked. The entity was patient, intelligent, and absolutely relentless. Running didn't help, hiding didn't help, prayer didn't help, exorcism didn't help. Every Corvinus who reached their 35th year died on November 17th. The bloodline was cursed. The pattern was unbreakable. My mother, Elena Corvinus, was born in 1963. She grew up knowing what awaited her. The family was small by then. So many had died. So many had chosen not to have children, hoping to starve the curse by ending the bloodline. But something in my mother was stubborn, defiant. She refused to let the entity win, by default. When she was 26, she met my father. I never knew him. He died in a car accident before I was born, never knowing about the curse, never knowing what his child would inherit. My mother told me later, in one of our rare conversations about it, that she was almost relieved. It meant he wouldn't watch her die. It meant he wouldn't see what was coming. I was born on November 17th, 1990. My mother knew what that meant. I would either die on my 35th birthday, or I would be the one to finally break the curse. She'd hoped for the latter, prayed for it, but she also knew the odds. She raised me alone in a small apartment in Rome. She'd moved there specifically to be close to the Vatican, hoping that proximity to holy power might offer some protection. She worked as a translator, spoke 6 languages fluently. She was brilliant, my mother, kind and strong and determined not to let fear rule her life. But I remember the way she'd look at me sometimes. With love, yes, but also with terrible sadness. Like she was trying to memorize my face because she knew she wouldn't be there to see me grow up. She told me about the curse when I was 6. How do you explain something like that to a child? She did her best. She told me that our family had a sickness, a spiritual sickness, and that she was going to die soon, but that I shouldn't be afraid because people who loved me would take care of me. I didn't really understand. Not then. On November 10th, 1998, my mother took me to a cafe near our apartment. She bought me hot chocolate and a pastry. We sat there for hours, and she talked to me about everything. Her childhood, her parents, the places she'd travelled, stories about my father. She talked like she was trying to fit an entire lifetime of conversations into one afternoon. "Daniel," she said finally, "I want you to remember that I love you. No matter what happens, no matter how scared you get, remember that I loved you more than anything in this world. And I want you to be brave. Can you be brave for me?" "Yes, Mama," I said, not understanding why she was crying. "Good boy," she whispered. "My good, brave boy." That was the last real conversation we had. On November 17th, 1998, I came home from school and found my mother dead. I was 7 years old. I'd spent the day at school learning mathematics and grammar, playing with other children during recess, being normal. When the final bell rang, I walked home like I did every day, my school bag bouncing against my back. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building, with narrow stairs. I climbed them, humming a song I'd learned in music class. I used my key to unlock the door. But the door only opened a few inches before stopping. The chain was on. That was wrong. My mother never used the chain during the day, only at night. "Mama?" I called through the gap. No answer. "Mama, I'm home." Still nothing. I pressed my face to the gap and looked inside. I could see part of the living room, the couch, the bookshelf, and on the floor between the couch and the kitchen, I could see my mother's feet. They were positioned wrong, bent at an angle that didn't make sense. "Mama?" My voice was smaller now, scared. I ran downstairs and pounded on our neighbour's door. Signora Russo, an old woman who always gave me candy. She opened the door, saw my face, and immediately knew something was wrong. "Daniel, what is it?" "My mama, she's on the floor. She won't answer. The door is chained." Signora Russo called other neighbours. They tried to talk to my mother through the door. No response. Someone called the police. Within 10 minutes, officers arrived. They broke down the door, chain snapping. Signora Russo tried to cover my eyes, tried to pull me away. But I saw my mother on the floor, her body bent backward in a bridge, arms twisted behind her at angles that made my stomach hurt to look at. I saw her face, locked in an expression I'd never seen on her before. She looked terrified. Absolutely, completely terrified. I didn't understand death yet, not really. But I understood that something terrible had happened. That my mother, who'd been alive and smiling and buying me hot chocolate just a week ago, was now this broken thing on the floor. I screamed. I fought against Signora Russo's arms, trying to get to my mother. Police held me back. Someone carried me out of the apartment. I remember crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I remember the world becoming this blurry, terrible thing that didn't make sense anymore. They took me to a hospital, then to a facility for children who had nowhere else to go. I spent 2 days in a small room with toys I didn't touch and food I couldn't eat. I just sat on the bed, staring at the wall, trying to understand why my mother was gone. On the 3rd day, Cardinal Francesco Dante came to see me. He was an old man, even then. Probably in his 70s, with white hair and a face lined with decades of experience. He wore the red robes of his office, but he took them off when he entered my room, sitting across from me in just his black cassock. "Hello, Daniel," he said gently. "My name is Francesco. I was a friend of your mother's." I didn't respond. I'd barely spoken since finding her body. "I know what happened to your mother," he continued, "and I know you don't understand why. You're going to have many questions, and I promise I'll answer them all. But first, I need to ask you something very important. Do you have any other family? Aunts, uncles, grandparents?" I shook my head. My mother had been alone in the world. Now I was too. "I see," Cardinal Dante said. He was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. "Daniel, your mother wrote to me before she died. She knew what was going to happen to her. She knew because the same thing happened to her mother, and her grandmother, and many people in your family before that. There's a curse on the Corvinus bloodline, a demon that hunts your family." I stared at him. At 7 years old, demons were things from stories, not real things that killed your mother. "I don't expect you to fully understand right now," he said, "but your mother made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would take care of you. Not just give you a home, but prepare you, train you, give you the tools to fight back when you're older." "Fight what?" I whispered. My first words in 3 days. "The thing that killed your mother," Cardinal Dante said. "When you turn 35, it will come for you too, on November 17th. The same day, the same age, the same way. It's killed every Corvinus for almost 200 years. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was too numb to feel it, or maybe, at 7 years old, 35 seemed so impossibly far away that it didn't feel real. "Can you stop it?" I asked. "We've never been able to before," he admitted. "But we've never had someone as young as you to train. Your mother believed that if we started preparing you now, if we dedicated years to teaching you everything we know about fighting demons, you might have a chance. The first real chance any Corvinus has ever had." He looked at me with eyes that were kind but also terribly sad. "I won't lie to you, Daniel. This will not be a normal childhood. You'll live in Vatican City, in a place most people don't know exists. You'll study things most children never learn. You'll train in ways that will be difficult and sometimes frightening, but it's the only way to give you a fighting chance. I thought about my mother's last words to me. Be brave. Can you be brave for me? Okay, I said quietly. Cardinal Dante smiled, but it was a sad smile. You're a remarkable boy, Daniel Corvinus. Your mother would be proud. 3 days later, I moved to Vatican City. The building I was taken to wasn't on any official Vatican maps. It was tucked into a corner of the city-state that tourists never saw, an old stone structure that looked like it had been there for centuries. In a way, it had. Cardinal Dante explained that it was a residence for people involved in what the church called spiritual warfare. Exorcists, demonologists, priests who specialized in the things the church preferred not to discuss publicly. And now me, a 7-year-old boy who just watched his mother die. My apartment was small but comfortable. A bedroom with a single bed, a cross on the wall, and a window that looked out over a small courtyard. A bathroom with a shower that took me weeks to figure out. Because the knobs were in Latin, a living space with a desk, bookshelves and a sitting area. Father Ambrose, who would become one of my primary teachers, helped me settle in that first day. He was a large man, probably in his 40s, with a military bearing and kind eyes. This is your home now, Daniel, he said. I know it's strange and new. I know you miss your mother. That's okay. You're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to cry. But I also want you to know that everyone in this building is here to help you. We're your family now. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Over the next few weeks, I met the others who lived in the building. Father Gregor Constantine, the chief exorcist, a bear of a man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek from an exorcism that had gone wrong. Dr. Isabella Navarro, the psychiatric consultant who would meet with me weekly to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Monsignor Paolo Vitelli, an elderly priest who specialized in ancient languages and demonology. Father Luis Moretti, younger and more energetic, who assisted Father Gregor in exorcisms. They all knew why I was there. They all knew what I was training for. My education began immediately. Not normal school subjects, though I learned those too, but my real education was in things most people never study. Latin. I started learning Latin when I was 7. Not church Latin, but classical Latin, the language of ancient Rome. Father Ambrose drilled me for hours every day until I could read and speak it fluently. Why do I need to know Latin? I asked once. Because demons are old, Father Ambrose explained. Many of them predate modern languages. Latin is one of the languages of power, used in exorcisms and bindings for centuries. If you're going to fight what killed your mother, you need to speak the languages it understands. Then Greek. Ancient Greek, the language of the New Testament and the early church fathers. Then Hebrew. Then Aramaic. By the time I was 10, I could read religious texts in their original languages. But language was only the beginning. Theology came next. Not the theology taught in regular Catholic schools, but deep, complex theological concepts. The nature of angels and demons, the hierarchies of hell, the ways demons interact with our world, possession symptoms, and stages, the theory of spiritual warfare. Monsignor Vitelli would sit with me for hours, walking me through ancient texts that described encounters with demonic entities. Some of these texts weren't even in the official church library. They were kept in the restricted archives, documents the church had collected over centuries but never published. Knowledge is your first weapon, Monsignor Vitelli told me. Understanding what you face, how it thinks, what it wants. That's how you survive. I learned about different types of curses. Generational curses, bloodline curses, bound curses, free curses. I learned about demons that possessed individuals versus demons that attached to families or places. I studied every documented case the church had of bloodline tethers, which weren't many. The phenomenon was rare, but the Corvinus case was the most thoroughly documented in church history. They'd been studying my family for over a century. I read every file, every report, every investigation. I learned about ancestors I'd never met, all killed the same way. I memorized the dates, the circumstances, the failed attempts to break the curse. I read my great-great-great-great-grandfather Lucien's journal until I'd memorized every word. His handwriting was elegant, even when he was exhausted. His faith was deep, and his final entry, that description of feeling watched after the exorcism, sent chills down my spine every time I read it. Physical training started when I was 8. Father Ambrose had been a military chaplain before coming to the Vatican. He understood combat, strategy, physical conditioning. You might think exorcism is purely spiritual, he told me, and in many ways, it is. But demons are also physical when they manifest. They can attack you physically. You need to be strong. You need to be fast. You need to be able to take pain and keep functioning. He taught me hand-to-hand combat, how to fall without injuring myself, how to break holds, how to defend against attacks. We practiced for hours every day in a training room in the basement, just us and padded mats. As I got older, the training intensified. Running, weightlifting, endurance exercises that left me gasping and exhausted. Father Ambrose pushed me hard, but he also taught me about my body, about breathing, about using fear as fuel rather than letting it paralyze me. Pain is temporary, he'd say as I struggled through another set of exercises. Fear is temporary, but quitting lasts forever. When I was 13, Father Gregor began teaching me about spiritual combat. This was different from physical training. This was about protecting your mind and soul during an encounter with a demonic entity. A demon will attack you on every level, Father Gregor explained. Physically, yes, but also mentally and spiritually. It will try to break your faith. It will show you things that aren't real to make you doubt yourself. It will dig into your memories and pull out your worst moments, your greatest shames, and throw them in your face. He taught me meditation techniques, ways to center my mind and filter out demonic influence. He taught me prayers of protection, some in Latin, some in ancient languages, even older. He taught me how to recognize when a thought was my own, versus when it was being planted by an external force. Your mind is a fortress, he'd say. You need to learn to defend it. We practiced with role-playing exercises. Father Gregor would play the role of a demon, verbally attacking me, trying to make me angry or scared or doubtful. In the beginning, I'd break down quickly. He'd find wounds I didn't even know I had, and press on them until I was crying or angry. But over time, I got better. I learned to recognize the techniques, to separate manipulation from truth, to maintain my center even when being psychologically assaulted. When I was 16, I witnessed my first exorcism. A young man, early 20s, had been brought to the Vatican by his family. Classic possession symptoms, speaking in unknown languages, impossible knowledge, violence. The entity had been growing stronger for weeks. Father Gregor performed the exorcism in a secured room in the basement. I watched from behind a blessed barrier, taking notes, observing everything. It was worse than anything I'd imagined. The young man's body contorted in ways that should have broken bones. His voice changed constantly, sometimes sounding like a child, sometimes like an ancient man, sometimes like something that wasn't human at all. He spoke in languages I recognized and some I didn't. The entity noticed me watching. "Little Corvinus," it said, staring right at me with eyes that were completely black. "Little cursed Corvinus, we know you, we're waiting for you. November 17th is coming." I felt ice in my veins. Father Gregor quickly commanded the demon to be silent and focus on him, not me. But for those few seconds, I'd felt it. The entity had looked at me, and known exactly who I was. The exorcism lasted 14 hours. When it was finally over, when the young man collapsed and Father Gregor declared the entity banished, I helped clean up. I'd vomited twice during the procedure, but I'd stayed. I'd watched everything. "You did well," Father Gregor said afterward. "First exorcism is always the hardest to witness." "It knew me," I said quietly. "It knew about the curse." "Demons talk to each other," Father Gregor explained. "They share information. What's hunting your family is known in their world. They mock us with it. A curse we can't break. A bloodline we can't protect." "But I'm going to break it," I said. Father Gregor looked at me for a long moment. "I believe you might." By 17, I'd assisted in 3 more exorcisms. By 20, Father Gregor allowed me to perform one under his supervision. A young woman who'd been possessed after using a Ouija board, of all things. The possession was relatively minor, the demon weak, but it was real and I banished it. The feeling afterward was indescribable. The knowledge that I'd helped someone, that I'd fought a demon and won. It gave me hope. If I could banish other demons, maybe I could handle the one that hunted my family. But Cardinal Dante was always careful to remind me that what I faced was different. Standard possessions involve demons that are opportunistic, he explained during one of our monthly meetings when I was 21. They find a weak point in someone's spiritual defenses and slip in. They're parasites looking for a host. What's hunting your family is different. It's intelligent, patient, powerful, and it's had 200 years to study the Corvinus bloodline. It knows you better than you know yourself, Daniel. Never forget that. I didn't forget. How could I? Every November 17th that passed was a reminder. Another year closer to my 35th birthday. Another year closer to the day I'd either break the curse or die screaming like my mother had. Dr. Navarro met with me every week without fail. She was in her 50s with greying hair and eyes that seemed to see right through any pretense. Our sessions were the only time I could truly be honest about how I was feeling. "How are you sleeping?" she asked during one session when I was 19. "Not well," I admitted. "Same nightmares. I'm in a locked room and something is outside trying to get in. I can hear it breathing. Sometimes I wake up certain that it's standing in the corner of my bedroom, watching me." "That's understandable, given what you're preparing for," she said. "But Daniel, I worry about you. You've spent your entire adolescence training to fight a demon. You've had no normal teenage experiences, no dates, no parties, no rebellion against authority. You've been focused on one single goal since you were 7 years old. What's the alternative?" I asked. "Pretend the curse doesn't exist? Try to live a normal life until November 17th, 2025, and then die anyway?" "No," she said quietly, "but I want you to understand what this has cost you. You've sacrificed your childhood, your youth, your chance to discover who you are outside of this curse. That's a tremendous loss, Daniel, and I want you to acknowledge it, to grieve it, so that if you do survive, you're not so damaged that you can't live the life you fought for." I was quiet for a long time. "Sometimes I see other people my age," I said finally. "When I'm in Rome, running errands, or just walking, I see them laughing with friends, holding hands with girlfriends, being carefree and stupid and alive, and I hate them. Just for a moment, I hate them because they have what I'll never have." "That's not hate," Dr. Navarro said gently. "That's grief. You're grieving the life you should have had." "Will it ever stop hurting?" I asked. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I do know that you're stronger than you realize. The fact that you can acknowledge this pain rather than burying it shows tremendous emotional maturity." Those sessions with Dr. Navarro kept me sane. She was the only person I could truly talk to about the cost of my situation. Father Gregor and the other priests understood spiritual warfare, but they'd chosen their path. I'd had mine chosen for me when I was born on November 17th, into a cursed bloodline. When I was 23, something changed in my training. Cardinal Dante called me to his office, which had become a familiar space over the years. Books lined every wall. A large wooden desk dominated the room. A crucifix hung behind his chair. He'd aged significantly in the 16 years since I'd met him. He was in his late 80s now, moving more slowly, his hands shaking slightly, but his mind was still sharp. "Daniel," he said, "we need to discuss your future, specifically your strategy for confronting the entity." I leaned forward. This was the conversation I'd been waiting for. "We've spent 16 years preparing you," Cardinal Dante continued. "You're more educated in demonology than most priests who specialize in it. You're physically fit and trained in combat. You're spiritually disciplined and mentally fortified. But we need to decide what you're actually going to do when November 17th, 2025 arrives." "I'm going to complete Lucian's ritual," I said. "Finish what he started." "That's not enough," Cardinal Dante said. "Lucian performed a standard exorcism. He drove the demon out of the girl, but he didn't bind it or banish it properly. If you simply try to perform the same ritual he did, you'll get the same result. The entity will latch onto you and you'll die. So what do I do differently?" Cardinal Dante pulled out an old file, one I'd seen before. The Corvinus case containing every document related to my family's curse. "We've had 200 years to study this," he said. "Dozens of the church's best minds have examined this case, and we've developed a theory. The entity isn't fully in our world. It exists partially here, partially in another realm. It's using your bloodline as an anchor point, a tether that allows it to maintain a connection to our reality. That's why it keeps killing Corvinus descendants. Every death strengthens its anchor." "How do we break the anchor?" I asked. "You don't break it," Cardinal Dante said. "You use it. The entity is tethered to your bloodline, which means it's tethered to you. That tether works both ways, Daniel. If you can force it to manifest fully in our world, pull it completely through, using that connection, then it can be bound and trapped permanently." I understood immediately. I have to bait it out, offer myself as a target. "Yes," Cardinal Dante said gravely, "but not just offer yourself. You have to complete Lucian's ritual, the binding he left unfinished, and you have to do it while the entity is actively trying to kill you. One mistake, one moment of lost focus, and you're dead." "Has this ever been done before?" "Never," Cardinal Dante admitted. "At least, not in any case we have documented. You would be the first person to ever deliberately confront a fully manifested bloodline tether. The risk is enormous. Even with all your training, your chances of survival are, at best, uncertain." "But it's the only chance," I said. "The only one we've been able to conceive," he agreed. "Every other approach has failed. Running doesn't work. Hiding doesn't work. Preventative measures don't work. The only option left is to stop running, stand your ground, and fight." "Where?" I asked. "Where should I do this?" "Where it started," Cardinal Dante said. "Romania, the chapel where Lucian performed the original exorcism. That's where the entity first attached itself to your bloodline. That's where the anchor is strongest. It's also where you'll have the best chance of completing the binding." Over the next several years, we refined the plan. Father Gregor worked with me on the specific ritual I'd need to perform. It was based on Lucian's original exorcism, but expanded with 2 centuries of additional knowledge about binding and banishment. We practiced it thousands of times until I could recite every word, every gesture, every element from memory. "You need to be able to do this in your sleep," Father Gregor said, "because when you're actually performing it, you'll be under attack. The entity will be trying to break your concentration, trying to stop you. You can't afford to forget a single word." Father Ambrose intensified my physical training. Not just general fitness, but specific endurance training. how to maintain focus while in pain, how to keep reciting prayers while being struck, how to function while terrified. Fear is natural, he told me during a particularly brutal training session when I was 26. But you can't let it control you. When you're in that chapel, when that thing manifests and you see what it really is, your instinct will be to run. You have to override that instinct. You have to stand your ground and keep performing the ritual, no matter what. Dr. Navarro's sessions became more focused on mental preparation. Visualization exercises where I'd imagine the confrontation, imagine staying calm, imagine succeeding. Techniques for managing extreme stress and trauma. What you're preparing for is beyond what most humans ever face, she told me during a session when I was 28. You're going to see something that your brain isn't designed to process, something that violates the laws of reality as we understand them. You need to prepare yourself mentally for that experience because if your mind breaks when you see it, you're dead. When I was 30, Cardinal Dante had a massive stroke. He survived, but he was never quite the same afterward. His speech was slurred, his mobility was limited, but he insisted on continuing to oversee my training. I need to see this through, he told me from his wheelchair out in the Vatican hospital. Your mother asked me to take care of you. I gave her my word. I won't rest until I know you've faced this thing. You've done more than anyone could ask, I said. You gave me a chance, a real chance. I pray it's enough, he said quietly. As my 35th birthday approached, the weight I'd been carrying my entire life became almost unbearable. Every November 17th that had passed had been a reminder, but they'd been distant. The curse wouldn't claim me until I turned 35. I'd had time, but now time was running out. When I turned 33, I started having more frequent nightmares. The same dream over and over. I'd be in my mother's apartment, walking through the door. I'd see her on the floor, body twisted. But when I got close, her head would turn toward me, neck bending at an impossible angle. Her black eyes would open, and she'd smile with too many teeth. Your turn soon, Daniel, she'd say in a voice that wasn't hers. November 17th is coming. I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, certain that something was in my room. The feeling of being watched grew stronger as I got older. It knew I was approaching. It was waiting. When I turned 34, I requested access to the most restricted section of the Vatican archives. The section that contained original documents from some of the Church's most dangerous cases. Cases involving entities so powerful that the Church had sealed the files to prevent anyone from attempting similar confrontations. I spent months in those archives reading everything I could find. I was looking for anything that might help, any piece of knowledge that might give me an edge. I found accounts of priests who'd faced powerful demons and survived. But I also found accounts of priests who'd failed, who'd been driven insane or killed in horrible ways. One document in particular stayed with me, a journal from a French priest in the 1600s who'd attempted to bind a demon that had been terrorizing his parish. He'd written detailed notes about the ritual, about what went wrong. His final entry was barely legible, written in a shaking hand. It showed me what I truly am, not what I believe myself to be, but the truth beneath. Every sin, every weakness, every moment of doubt laid bare. I cannot unknow what I have seen. I cannot unsee myself. May God forgive me for what I must do. He killed himself the next day. That was the real danger, I realized. Not just physical death, but psychological destruction. The entity could show me things about myself, about my family, about reality itself that would break my mind. I had to be prepared for that. Had to be strong enough to see the worst and keep functioning anyway. I spent my last year before 35 in intense preparation, physical training 6 hours a day, spiritual exercises, meditation, prayer, review of the ritual until I could recite it backward if needed. I studied Lucien's journal one more time, analysing every word of that final entry. Something learned my name. That was the key. During the exorcism, while Lucien was focused on the girl, the demon had been studying him, learning him, and it had attached itself to him so thoroughly that his blood became its anchor. I had to avoid that mistake. I had to remain focused on the binding, not allow the entity to distract me with psychological warfare. One moment of lost focus, and I'd become another case file in the Vatican archives, another dead Corvinus. In August of 2025, 3 months before my birthday, I met with all my teachers one final time. Father Gregor, Father Ambrose, Monsignor Vitelli, Dr. Navarro. They'd spent 27 years preparing me for one moment. Now that moment was approaching. "You're ready," Father Gregor said simply. "As ready as anyone could be." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Good," Father Ambrose said. "Fear will keep you sharp. Just don't let it paralyze you." Dr. Navarro pulled me aside after the meeting. "Daniel, I want you to promise me something. If you survive this, give yourself permission to actually live. Don't spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for something else to come. If you break this curse, let yourself be free." "I promise," I said. In September, the Vatican approved the plan officially. I would travel to Romania in mid-October. I'd have 3 weeks to prepare the site, to sanctify the chapel, to set up the ritual space. On November 16th, the night before my birthday, I'd perform the ritual. Cardinal Dante insisted on seeing me before I left. I visited him in his apartment in Vatican City. He was in his wheelchair, a blanket over his lap, but his eyes were still sharp. 27 years ago, I took in a frightened 7-year-old boy who'd just lost his mother, he said slowly, his speech still affected by the stroke. I watched that boy grow into one of the most remarkable young men I've ever known. Whatever happens in that chapel, Daniel, know that I'm proud of you. Your mother would be proud of you." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "for everything, for giving me a home, for giving me hope." "Thank you for letting an old priest feel like he made a difference," he replied. "Now go, finish this, end the curse, and then live, Daniel. Live for all the Corvinus who never got the chance." The documentary crew approached me in late September. A filmmaker named Giovanni who'd done work for the Vatican before, documenting exorcisms and other cases of spiritual warfare. Cardinal Dante had approved it, wanting everything recorded. "If you succeed, it needs to be documented," Cardinal Dante explained. "Other families might be dealing with similar curses. They need to know it's possible to break free. And if you fail, well, we need to understand what went wrong so the next attempt can be better planned." I agreed. Part of me wanted a record, wanted proof that I'd tried, that I'd stood my ground even if I died. Another part of me hoped that if I succeeded, the documentary might give others hope. Giovanni and his crew of 3 would follow me to Romania. They'd document the preparation, the ritual, everything. They'd position cameras around the chapel's perimeter, capturing what they could without interfering. "I won't lie," Giovanni said during our first meeting. "I've filmed exorcisms before. I've seen things that most people don't believe exist. But what you're attempting is unprecedented. I'm honored to document it, but I'm also terrified for you." "That makes 2 of us," I said. And now here we are. October 20th, 2025. 4 weeks until November 17th. 4 weeks until I either break a 200-year curse or become its 17th victim. I'm sitting in my apartment in Vatican City recording this. Tomorrow morning, I leave for Romania. Father Gregor and 6 other priests will accompany me. They're the best spiritual warriors the church has. They'll form a protective circle during the ritual, maintaining prayers of protection and reinforcement. I've been packing my things. Not that I have much. Some clothes. My personal copy of Lucien's journal, which Cardinal Dante gave me years ago. A rosary that belonged to my mother. The small silver crucifix Father Gregor gave me. A few books, letters from people who've meant something to me over the years. I wrote farewell messages just in case. One to Dr. Navarro, thanking her for keeping me sane. One to Father Gregor, Father Ambrose, and the other priests who trained me. One to Cardinal Dante, though I'm not sure he'll live to read it, given his health. And one to Sophia, the librarian in the Vatican archives, who always smiled at me, who I never had the courage to ask out because what was the point of starting something I couldn't finish? In that last letter, I told her that, if I survived, I'd like to take her to dinner. A real date, not training, not preparation, just two people getting to know each other. I sealed it and left it with Dr. Navarro to deliver if I make it past November 17th. I keep thinking about my mother, about that last day we spent together in the cafe, when she talked to me like she was trying to fit a lifetime into one afternoon. She knew what was coming. She knew she was going to die, but she tried to make that last day beautiful anyway. I understand her better now. When you know death is coming, every moment becomes precious. The taste of coffee, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of someone you love laughing. She was trying to fill me with good memories, trying to give me something to hold on to after she was gone. I'm trying to do the same now, memorizing the view from my window, the way the light falls across the courtyard, the sound of church bells ringing in the distance. If I die in that chapel in Romania, these will be my last peaceful moments. I want to remember them, but I don't think I'm going to die. I know that probably sounds like bravado. Every Corvinus before me probably thought they'd be the one to break the curse. Every one of them was wrong. But I've spent 27 years preparing for this in ways none of them could. I've been trained by the best exorcists the Catholic Church has. I know more about bloodline tethers than anyone alive. I understand what Lucian did wrong, and I know how to do it right. More than that, I'm angry. I've been carrying that anger for 27 years, keeping it controlled but letting it fuel me. Anger at the entity for killing my mother, for stealing her from me when I was 7. Anger for stealing my childhood, my chance at a normal life. Anger for 200 years of Corvinus deaths, generations of my family murdered by the same relentless thing. When I walk into that chapel on November 16th, I'm not walking in as a victim. I'm walking in as a hunter who's been tracking his prey for 27 years. I'm walking in as Daniel Corvinus, last of my line, and I'm going to finish what Lucian started, or I'm going to die trying. Either way, the waiting ends in 4 weeks. Either way, November 17th will never be the same. The flight to Bucharest left Rome at 8 in the morning on October 21st. Father Gregor sat beside me, reading from a breviary, his lips moving silently in prayer. The other 6 priests who'd volunteered for this mission were scattered throughout the plane. Father Luis Moretti, who'd assisted in dozens of exorcisms. Father Chen Wei, a Chinese priest who specialized in Eastern demonic entities. Father Patrick O'Brien from Ireland, an expert in Celtic curses and bindings. Father Dmitry Volkov from Russia, who'd spent years studying possession in remote monasteries. Father Antonio Silva from Brazil, who'd faced some of the most violent possessions on record. And Father Jean-Baptiste from France, an elderly priest in his 70s who'd been performing exorcisms longer than I'd been alive. These were the Vatican's elite, and they were all risking their lives to help me. Giovanni and his crew were on the same flight, cameras already rolling occasionally to capture documentary footage. He'd explained his vision for the film during our flight prep. It would be a combination of present-day footage, historical reenactments, and interviews with experts, explaining the theological and paranormal aspects of what I was attempting. The goal is to make this accessible to general audiences while respecting the gravity of what you're doing, Giovanni had said. This isn't entertainment. This is documentation of something that's never been attempted before. As the plane descended towards Bucharest, I looked out the window at the Romanian countryside below. Mountains rising in the distance, forests spread across the landscape. Somewhere down there was the village of Vatican, where Lucian had performed his exorcism in 1824, where he'd unknowingly doomed our entire family, where I would either break the curse or join the list of victims. We landed in early afternoon and drove north from Bucharest in 2 rented vans. The journey took about 4 hours, the roads getting narrower and rougher as we climbed into the mountains. The landscape was beautiful, in a harsh way, dense forests of pine and oak, steep hillsides, small villages that looked like they'd existed for centuries without changing much. As we got closer to Varatek, I felt it, a pressure in the air, a weight that made it harder to breathe. The entity knew I was coming. Of course it did. It had been waiting for this since the moment I was born. The village itself was tiny, maybe 300 people, stone houses with steep roofs built to handle heavy snow, narrow streets paved with cobblestones, a small church at the centre of town with a bell tower that rose above the other buildings. Father Andre, the village priest, met us at the church. He was about 60, with a thick grey beard, turning white and eyes that crinkled when he smiled, but the smile faded when I introduced myself. Corvinus, he repeated slowly. That name is in our church records. A priest named Lucian Corvinus came here in 1824. He was my ancestor, I said. I've come to finish what he started. Father Andre crossed himself. Come inside, I'll show you what we have. The church was old, probably built in the 1700s. Simple wooden pews, icons on the walls painted in the Byzantine style. A smell of incense and candle wax that reminded me of home. Father Andre led us to a back room that served as an office. He pulled out an ancient leather-bound book, handled it carefully as he opened it, to a page marked with a ribbon. This is our parish record from 1824, he explained. March of that year, Father Lucian Corvinus performed an exorcism on Ileana Dalca, daughter of Petru Dalca, a merchant. The exorcism lasted 18 hours and was successful. The girl survived and recovered fully. He turned the page, but there's more. 21 days later, news arrived that Father Lucian had been found dead in his monastery cell. The circumstances were unusual. The church sent investigators. They suspected demonic involvement, but could prove nothing. What happened to the Dalca family? I asked. They left the village within a year, Father Andre said. According to the records, they said their chapel felt wrong after the exorcism. They abandoned it and moved to Bucharest. The building has been empty ever since. Can you show us where it is? Father Andre nodded. It's about a 30-minute walk from here. But I should warn you, people avoid that place. Even 200 years later, there's something about it that feels unwelcoming. Hunters won't go near it. Animals avoid the area. The forest around it is too quiet. That's where I need to be, I said. We left the church and followed Father Andre up a winding path that led out of the village and into the forest. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Birds sang in the distance. It seemed peaceful. But as we walked, the forest gradually changed. The birdsong faded. The temperature dropped. The light seemed dimmer even though the sun hadn't moved. And I felt that pressure again, stronger now, like invisible hands pressing against my chest. Father Gregor noticed it too. Do you feel that? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, we're getting close. After about 25 minutes we entered a clearing. And there it was. The Dalca chapel stood in the centre of the clearing, partially collapsed but still recognisable. It had been built from grey stone, probably taken from the surrounding mountains. The roof had mostly caved in, allowing trees to grow up through the interior. The walls were covered in moss and ivy. The wooden door hung askew on broken hinges. But despite its ruined state, there was something about it that made my skin crawl. An aura of wrongness that was almost tangible. This was where it had happened, where Lucian had fought the demon, where the entity had latched onto him. I approached slowly, feeling the weight increase with every step. Behind me, I heard one of the priests, Father Antonio, muttering prayers in Portuguese. "This is the place," I said unnecessarily. Everyone could feel it. Giovanni and his crew were already filming, capturing the chapel from multiple angles. Father Gregor approached and stood beside me, studying the structure. "We'll need to make it structurally safe before you can perform the ritual inside," he said. "Some of those walls look ready to collapse, and we'll need to clear out the vegetation, establish the protective circles, sanctify every surface." "How long?" I asked. 3 weeks if we work efficiently," Father Gregor said, "which gives us just enough time." Over the next week, we transformed the ruined chapel. It was hard physical labor that left me exhausted every night. We cleared the interior of vegetation, cutting away trees and bushes that had grown inside. We reinforced the walls where necessary, using stones from the surrounding area. We repaired enough of the roof to provide shelter, while leaving openings for smoke and air to escape during the ritual. Father Chen Wei directed the sanctification process. We blessed every stone, every surface, using holy water mixed with salt. We drew protective symbols on the walls using blessed chalk, Latin and Greek phrases invoking divine protection. We established multiple layers of defensive circles using different traditions: Christian, Jewish mystical traditions, even some older pre-Christian symbols that the Church had incorporated over the centuries. At the 4 cardinal points of the chapel we placed relics. To the north, a fingerbone of Saint Benedict, patron saint against evil. To the east, a piece of the true cross, authenticated by Vatican experts. To the south, a vial of oil from the lamp that burns at St. Peter's tomb. To the west, a fragment of stone from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. These were powerful relics, items the Church rarely allowed to leave Vatican City. Cardinal Dante had personally authorized their use. They would form anchor points for the protective barrier. While we worked on the chapel, I spent my evenings studying Lucian's journal one final time. I'd memorized it years ago, but I read it again looking for any detail I might have missed. That final entry haunted me. Something learned my name. I understood now. During the exorcism, Lucian had been focused entirely on driving the demon out of Ileana. He'd been engaged in spiritual warfare, throwing all his energy into saving the girl. But while he was distracted, the demon had been studying him, learning his weaknesses, finding the cracks in his spiritual armor. And when the exorcism was over, when Lucian was exhausted and vulnerable, it had struck. I couldn't make the same mistake. I had to remain aware of the entity at all times during the ritual, never giving it an opening to attach itself more deeply. One moment of inattention, and I'd be dead. Dr. Navarro called me every evening, via video chat. She'd insisted on daily contact to monitor my mental state. "How are you holding up?" she asked on October 28th, exactly 3 weeks before my birthday. "I'm okay," I said, "tired, the work is exhausting, but I'm focused." "Are you sleeping?" I hesitated. "Some. The nightmares are worse. Being this close to the source, I can feel it more strongly. It's like there's a pressure against my mind, constantly pushing, trying to find a way in." "That's to be expected," Dr. Navarro said. "The entity is aware of you. It's testing your defenses. You need to maintain your meditation practice, your prayer routine. Don't let it distract you." "I won't," I promised. "Daniel," she said seriously, "I want you to remember something. You've spent 27 years preparing for this. You are the most qualified person to ever attempt what you're attempting. Trust your training. Trust yourself." "I will." After we ended the call, I walked outside the small house we were renting in the village. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky in patterns you never see in cities. It was November 1st now, just over 2 weeks until my birthday. I felt the entity out there in the darkness, watching, waiting. It had waited 200 years. What were a few more weeks? But I wasn't the same as the other Corvinus it had killed. They'd been victims, trying to flee or hide. I was something it had never faced before. A Corvinus who'd been raised specifically to fight back, who'd spent his entire life preparing for this moment. Come November 16th, we'd see which of us was stronger. By November 10th, the chapel was ready. We'd done everything possible to prepare. The structure was sound. The protective circles were drawn and consecrated. The relics were in place. Father Gregor had led us through multiple practice runs of the ritual, timing everything, ensuring everyone knew their roles. The 7 priests would form a protective circle around the chapel's exterior during the ritual. They'd maintain continuous prayers in 7 different languages, creating a barrier of faith that would reinforce my binding from outside. They couldn't enter the chapel once the ritual began. If they broke the circle, the entire structure would collapse, and the entity would be free to attack. I had to be alone inside, alone with whatever manifested. Father Gregor pulled me aside that evening. Tomorrow we begin the final preparation. 3 days of fasting and prayer, cleansing your spirit, strengthening your resolve. Then, on the evening of November 16th, you enter the chapel. "I'm ready," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "Daniel, I've trained many exorcists over the years. I've seen priests with decades of experience face powerful demons. But what you're attempting is beyond anything I've ever witnessed. If you have any doubts, if there's any part of you that's uncertain, we need to address it now." "I don't have doubts," I said. "I'm terrified, yes. But I don't doubt that this is what I need to do. What I was born to do." Father Gregor nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud. Whatever happens in that chapel, know that you've already shown more courage than most people display in their entire lives." The next 3 days were among the hardest of my life, fasting while maintaining intense spiritual disciplines, long hours of prayer, meditation aimed at centering my mind and fortifying my soul. Father Gregor led me through exercises designed to prepare me for psychological assault. "The entity will try to break you mentally," he reminded me repeatedly. "It will show you things, say things, try to make you believe lies about yourself, about your family, about God. You must hold firm to what you know is true." On November 14th, Cardinal Dante called. His voice was weak, but he insisted on speaking with me one last time. "Daniel, my boy," he said slowly, "I've been praying for you constantly. I want you to know that whatever happens, you've already accomplished something remarkable. You've faced your fear. You've prepared. You've refused to surrender. That takes a kind of courage most people never find." "Thank you, Cardinal," I said, "for everything. You gave me a chance when I had nothing." "You gave me purpose when I was simply going through the motions," he replied. "Now finish this, break the curse, and then live, Daniel. Live the life your mother wanted for you." After we hung up, I sat alone for a long time. Tomorrow, I'd enter the chapel. I'd begin the ritual that would either save me or kill me. After 27 years of preparation, everything came down to one night. November 15th dawned cold and grey. Father Andre held a special mass for us in the village church. The entire village attended, though most didn't know exactly what we were doing. They knew something significant was happening. They could feel the tension in the air. After Mass, Father Gregor gathered all of us in the house we'd been renting. "Tonight Daniel begins his vigil," Father Gregor announced. "He'll spend the night in prayer at the chapel preparing his spirit. Tomorrow evening, at sunset on November 16th, the ritual begins. We'll take our positions around the chapel and maintain the protective circle. Once Daniel enters and begins the binding ceremony, we cannot stop. We cannot enter. We can only pray and trust that 27 years of preparation was enough." He looked at each of us in turn. Some of you have asked to enter the chapel with Daniel, to fight beside him. I appreciate your courage, but this battle must be fought alone. The entity is tethered to the Corvinus bloodline. Only Daniel can complete the binding. Our role is to support him from outside, to maintain the spiritual barrier that will prevent the entity from escaping if things go wrong. And if things go very wrong, Father Antonio asked, then we seal the chapel and call for Vatican reinforcements, Father Gregor said grimly, but I don't believe that will be necessary. Daniel is ready. That afternoon, I walked to the chapel one final time before the ritual. The clearing was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. I stood at the entrance, looking at the work we'd done. The sanctified walls, the protective symbols, the relics positioned at the cardinal points. This was it. 200 years of family curse, 27 years of my life, all leading to tomorrow night. I entered the chapel and knelt in the centre, where I'd drawn the primary binding circle. In my hands, I held my mother's rosary, the beads worn smooth from decades of prayer. "Mum," I said quietly, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that I'm going to finish this. I'm going to break the curse that killed you and Grandma and all the Corvinus before us. I'm going to face the thing you saw in your last moments, and I'm going to trap it so it can never hurt anyone again." I paused, feeling emotion tighten my throat. "I miss you. I've missed you every day for 27 years. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I can honor you by ending this. And I will. I promise you, I will." I prayed there until sunset, then returned to the house. Giovanni wanted to interview me before tomorrow, to get my thoughts on camera. "How do you feel?" he asked, camera rolling. I thought about it carefully. I feel ready. Terrified, but ready. I've spent my entire life preparing for one moment. Tomorrow night, I'll find out if it was enough. And honestly, regardless of the outcome, I'm grateful. Grateful for the people who trained me. Grateful for the chance to fight back. Grateful that I don't have to die running scared like so many of my family did. I get to face this thing on my terms. "What do you want people to know?" Giovanni asked. "People who might watch this documentary years from now?" I looked directly into the camera. I want them to know that curses can be broken, that no matter how inevitable something seems, no matter how many generations have suffered, there's always hope. Evil wants you to believe you're powerless. It wants you to surrender before you even try. But sometimes the only way to find out if you can win is to stand your ground and fight. I paused, gathering my thoughts. And if I don't make it, if you're watching this because I failed, I want you to know that I died trying. I died standing my ground. And that's worth something. That has to be worth something. Giovanni turned off the camera. "That was powerful, Daniel, thank you." That night I barely slept. I lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, feeling the hours tick by. My last night as someone who hadn't yet faced the entity. My last night of not knowing. At 3 a.m, I gave up trying to sleep. I got dressed, gathered my things, and walked to the chapel. The forest was silent at that hour. No bird calls, no rustling of animals, just the sound of my footsteps on the dirt path and my own breathing. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see by. When I reached the clearing, I stopped. The chapel stood dark against the night sky, somehow darker than the surrounding darkness. And I felt it stronger than ever. The presence, the attention. It knew I was here. It had been waiting for this moment as eagerly as I had. I entered the chapel and lit the candles we'd positioned throughout the space. Dozens of them, their flames pushing back the darkness. I knelt in the center of the binding circle and began to pray. This was my vigil, my final preparation. I'd spend the next 18 hours in this place, fasting, praying, centering my mind and spirit. By sunset, I'd be as ready as I could possibly be. The morning came slowly, grey light filtering through the gaps in the repaired roof. I heard Father Gregor and the other priests arrive, taking positions around the chapel's exterior. Heard them begin their own prayers. They'd maintain this through the entire day and night, building spiritual momentum for the ritual. Around noon, I became aware of a sound. Quiet at first, then growing louder. Breathing. Slow and deliberate. Coming from somewhere inside the chapel, even though I was alone. This was it starting. The entity making its presence known. I didn't react. I continued my prayers, my meditation, refusing to acknowledge the sound. This was a test. It wanted to see if it could break my concentration before the ritual even began. The breathing grew louder, closer. I could feel cold air on the back of my neck as if something was standing right behind me. Still, I didn't turn. I kept my eyes forward, focused on the crucifix I'd placed on the wall ahead of me. My hands remained steady on my mother's rosary. Hours passed. The breathing continued. Sometimes it would fade, then return. Sometimes I'd hear other sounds, whispers in languages I didn't recognize, scratching on the walls, the sound of footsteps circling the chapel. None of it was real, not yet. These were psychological probes, the entity testing my defenses before the real confrontation. As afternoon shifted toward evening, Father Gregor's voice called from outside. "Daniel, sunset in 1 hour. Are you ready?" "Ready," I called back. I stood for the first time in hours, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from kneeling. I checked the binding circle one final time, ensuring every line was perfect. I positioned the items I'd need. Lucian's journal open to his description of the original exorcism, a bowl of holy water, blessed salt, my mother's rosary, the crucifix Father Gregor had given me, and a knife, consecrated, blessed by 7 priests over 7 days. I'd need it for the final part of the ritual. My blood to close the binding, my blood to sever the tether. The light outside began to fade. Through the gaps in the walls, I saw the sun sinking toward the horizon. The moment was almost here. Father Gregor's voice rose outside, joined by 6 others. They'd begun the protective prayers, 7 voices in 7 languages, creating a wall of faith around the chapel. I took my position in the center of the binding circle, knelt, placed my hands on Lucian's journal. The sun touched the horizon. The last rays of daylight painted the chapel walls red and gold. Then darkness fell, and I began. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti," I said, my voice steady. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." The traditional opening, the declaration of authority. The temperature dropped immediately. Frost formed on the walls despite it being only November. The candle flames turned blue. I continued, "Exorcizo te omnis spiritus immunde." I exorcise you, every unclean spirit. The words Lucian had spoken nearly 200 years ago in this same place. Something laughed. A sound that came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls in unnatural harmonics. I kept going, following the ritual, exactly as we'd practiced, calling upon saints and angels, invoking divine protection, establishing my authority to perform this binding. At exactly 7 o'clock, 1 hour into the ritual, the entity began to manifest. It started with the shadows. They moved independently of the candlelight, gathering in the corners, becoming thicker, more substantial. The air pressure changed, making my ears pop. The breathing sound returned, louder than before, definitely real now. I recited the binding prayers, the words that would force the entity to reveal itself fully. This was the dangerous part. I was deliberately calling it forth, pulling it completely into our world, using the bloodline tether as an anchor. By the blood of Lucian Corvinus, by the blood of all who died before me, by my blood as the last of the line, I call you forth. I command you to manifest. Show yourself, demon. Face the one you've hunted for 200 years. The shadows in the corner coalesced, took shape. Something tall, 8 feet at least, standing in the space where no one should be. My first instinct was to look away. Every survival instinct in my brain screamed at me to close my eyes, to not witness what was materializing. But I couldn't. I had to see it. I had to face it directly. The entity's form was wrong in ways that made my eyes hurt. It looked almost human, but the proportions were off. Limbs that were too long. Joints that bent in too many places. And its surface, it wasn't skin or fur or anything natural. It was like looking at something that existed in dimensions my eyes couldn't properly process. But the eyes, those were clear. Black pits that reflected no light, but somehow I could feel them looking at me, looking into me, seeing everything I was and everything I'd ever been. Daniel Corvinus. The voice didn't come from the thing's mouth. It formed directly in my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. Last of the line. The one who was trained to kill me. I forced myself to continue the ritual, reciting the next phase of the binding. My voice shook slightly, but the words came out correctly. The entity moved closer. Not walking. Simply existing in a different position. Now it was at the edge of my binding circle, so close I could feel the wrongness, radiating from it like cold radiation. You think these circles will protect you? It gestured at the protective symbols. You think your prayers and your relics and your blessed water mean anything? I'm older than your god, Daniel. I was here before the first human drew breath, and I'll be here long after the last one dies. I completed the binding sequence and moved to the next phase, the naming. If I could force it to reveal its true name, I could bind it more effectively. By the authority granted to me, I command you to speak your name. Reveal yourself, demon. It laughed again, that horrible multi-tone sound. You want my name. Names are for lesser beings. I am what I am. I am hunger that never satisfies. I am patience that outlasts empires. I am the thing your ancestor disturbed in 1824, and I am the thing that has fed on your bloodline ever since. You're a parasite, I said, continuing to recite binding prayers between my words. You latched onto Lucian because you're too weak to exist in our world, on your own. You need our blood to anchor you. You need us to survive. The entity's form rippled, like disturbed water. Was that anger? I need nothing, it hissed. I choose to use you. Your blood is convenient, a tether that lets me touch this world whenever I wish. Do you know how sweet it is, Daniel? The terror of a Corvinus, as they realize their time has come. The absolute horror as they see me for the first time. 16 of your family have fed me that fear. Lucian, Andrei, Nikolai, Maria, Victor, Margaret, your mother Elena. My hands tightened on the rosary at the mention of my mother. Oh yes, the entity purred. Sweet Elena. I remember her well. She fought so hard, tried to lock herself away from me, but there is nowhere a Corvinus can hide. I found her in that little apartment in Rome. I manifested in her bedroom while she prayed. And when she saw me, when she truly understood what I was, her mind nearly broke before I even touched her. You're lying, I said, though my voice wavered, trying to distract me. Am I? The entity's form shifted, and suddenly it wore my mother's face. Her features twisted in that expression of ultimate terror I'd seen when I found her body. She called for you, Daniel. In her final moments, she cried out for her little boy, hoping somehow you could save her. But you couldn't. You were just a child. Helpless. Useless. Rage flooded through me, hot and fierce. I wanted to lunge at it, to attack it physically. But that's what it wanted. If I left the protective circle, I was dead. I forced the anger down and continued the ritual. You have no power over me. You cannot break this binding. By the blood of martyrs, by the sacrifice of saints, by the power of... Power? The entity was suddenly closer, its face inches from mine, though I hadn't seen it move. The face was no longer my mother's. It was something else, something that hurt to look at. Let me show you power. The chapel disappeared. I was suddenly in my childhood apartment in Rome, standing in the living room. And there was my mother on the floor, body twisted, face frozen in terror. But this time she was still alive, still conscious. Her eyes found mine. "Daniel," she gasped. "Help me, please help me." "This isn't real," I said, though my voice shook. "This is an illusion." "Is it?" My mother's voice came from behind me. I turned and she was standing there, whole and healthy and alive. She smiled at me, the warm smile I remembered from childhood. "Daniel, my sweet boy, you can save me, end the ritual. Leave the circle, come to me." "You're not my mother," I said. "Of course I am." She reached out her hands. "I'm so proud of you, Daniel. You've grown into such a strong young man. But you don't have to do this. You don't have to fight. Come with me. We can be together again." Tears streamed down my face. Part of me knew this was a trick, but part of me, the 7-year-old boy who'd found his mother dead, wanted desperately to believe. "Please," my mother said, "don't leave me again. Don't let me die alone." I closed my eyes. "You're not real. My mother is dead. This is a lie." When I opened my eyes, I was back in the chapel. My mother was gone. The entity stood where she'd been, that terrible form filling my vision. "Very good," it said mockingly. "Stronger than I expected. But I have all night, Daniel, and I've had 200 years to learn everything about the Corvinus family. Every weakness, every fear, every secret shame." I returned to the ritual with shaking hands, reciting the next sequence. I was entering the critical phase now. The actual binding. If I could complete this, if I could maintain focus, I could trap it. The entity circled the binding circle, testing it, looking for weaknesses. "You think you're the first to try this? Nicolai attempted a binding. I killed him and everyone helping him. Maria thought her faith could protect her. I showed her truths about her precious God that shattered her mind before I touched her body. I kept praying, kept reciting. Sweat poured down my face despite the cold. My muscles ached from kneeling. But I couldn't stop. Couldn't break concentration. "Let me show you what you truly are," the entity said. "Not the weapon the church tried to forge. Not the hero you imagine yourself to be. Let me show you the truth." Another shift, and I was looking at myself from outside, watching my life play out like a film. Every moment of weakness, every time I'd failed, every doubt I'd ever had. Times I'd lied, times I'd been cruel, times I'd failed people who'd trusted me. I saw myself at 12, angry at Father Ambrose for pushing me too hard in training. I'd cursed him under my breath, wished terrible things on him. I saw myself at 16, stealing wine from the Vatican cellars and getting drunk alone in my room, crying about the life I'd never have. I saw myself at 23, so consumed with rage at my situation that I punched a wall until my knuckles bled. Every petty sin, every moment of weakness, every failure of faith or character, all of it laid bare. "This is what you are," the entity whispered. "Not a hero, just a frightened, angry boy, pretending to be brave. You hate God for cursing you with this bloodline. You hate the church for stealing your childhood. You hate yourself for not being strong enough to save your mother. You're broken, Daniel. Twisted, just like your family's corpses." The words cut deep because some of them were true. I had been angry. I had harbored resentments. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't a saint. But Dr. Navarro's words came back to me. You're going to see things that make you doubt yourself. But remember, having doubts doesn't make you weak. Being afraid doesn't make you a coward. Being human doesn't make you a failure. You're right, I said out loud, surprising the entity. I'm not perfect. I've been angry and scared and resentful. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong to fight you. That doesn't mean I should surrender. I raised my voice, reciting the binding prayers with renewed strength. I bind you by the imperfection of humanity and the perfection of divine grace. I bind you by the blood of martyrs who died, afraid but faithful. I bind you by the tears of saints who doubted but persevered. The entity screamed, a sound that should have shattered the walls. You cannot bind me. I already am, I said. I could feel it now, the binding taking hold. The protective circles were glowing, not with visible light but with some kind of spiritual energy I could sense. The relics at the cardinal points were activating, creating a cage of holy power. The entity threw itself against the binding, and I felt the impact like a physical blow. The candles flickered. The walls shook. Outside I could hear the priests' voices rising, their prayers intensifying to reinforce the barrier. I have killed 16 of your bloodline, the entity roared. I will kill you too. No, I said firmly, because I'm going to do something none of them could. I'm going to sever the tether. I picked up the consecrated knife. You're the last Corvinus, the entity said quickly. If you die, your bloodline ends. The tether breaks. I lose my anchor to your world. But you die. Is that really victory? I'm not going to die, I said. I'm going to offer my blood freely, not as a victim, but as the final seal. My blood closes this binding. My blood ends your claim on the Corvinus family. My blood sends you back to whatever pit spawned you. The entity's form flickered, becoming less stable. For the first time, it looked uncertain. I drew the blade across my left palm, just as I'd practiced 1,000 times. Blood welled up, dark and red in the candlelight. I let it drip onto the center of the binding circle. I am Daniel Corvinus, I said, voice ringing clear. Last of my line. Final blood of the bloodline you've hunted for 200 years. I offer this freely, not in fear, not in surrender, but in defiance. My blood closes this circle. My blood severs your tether. My blood ends your claim on my family forever. The blood hit the circle and began to glow, not red, but white, bright and pure. It spread along the lines of the binding circle, racing outward, filling every protective symbol we'd drawn. The entity screamed again, but this time it wasn't just sound. It was rage and fear and disbelief all mixed together. No, you cannot! I'm eternal, I am... Finished, I said. I spoke the final words of the binding, the last prayer Lucien should have said but didn't, the completion of the ritual. By the authority of heaven, by the power of the divine, by the sacrifice of the innocent and the faith of the righteous, I seal this binding. You are contained. You are severed. You are cast into the outer darkness where you can harm no one. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I bind you eternally. The white light from my blood exploded outward, filling the entire chapel. The entity screamed one final time, a sound of absolute defeat. Its form compressed, pulled inward by the binding, becoming smaller and denser. The protective circles glowed so brightly I had to shield my eyes. The relics at the cardinal points flared with power. Outside, the priest's prayers reached a crescendo. 7 voices, united in one purpose. The entity became a point of absolute darkness in the center of all that light. For just a moment, it hung there, suspended between worlds. Then, with a sound like reality healing, it vanished. The light disappeared. The temperature returned to normal. The candles burned yellow again. Complete silence. I knelt there, breathing hard, my cut hand still bleeding, waiting for something else to happen. waiting for the trap, waiting for it to come back. But nothing happened. The weight I'd felt my entire life, that sense of being watched, was gone. Completely and utterly gone. The air felt lighter. The chapel felt like just a building, not a place of power and horror. It was over. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Relief and joy and exhaustion all crashed over me at once, and I laughed until tears ran down my face. Outside, I heard running footsteps. The door burst open, and Father Gregor rushed in, the other priests right behind him. "Daniel," Father Gregor said carefully, "are you hurt?" I held up my bleeding hand. "Just a cut. I'm fine. I'm actually fine." "The entity." "Bound," I said. "Sealed. Gone. I did it, Father. I actually did it." Father Gregor pulled me to my feet and embraced me. "Blessed Mother of God, you actually did it." The other priests crowded around, some crying, some praying, all of them looking at me with awe. Giovanni and his crew entered with cameras, filming everything. "How do you feel?" Giovanni asked, pointing his camera at me. I looked down at my blood-stained hand, then up at the chapel walls, covered in protective symbols. I felt lighter than I'd felt in my entire life. Free. "Ask me tomorrow," I said, smiling. "Ask me on November 17th. But I already knew the answer. They bandaged my hand and helped me back to the house in the village. I was exhausted, barely able to walk. Father Gregor half carried me the last 100 yards. "Sleep," he said, helping me into bed. "You've earned it." I slept for 14 hours straight. No nightmares, no sense of being watched. Just deep, dreamless, peaceful sleep. When I woke, light was streaming through the window. I checked my phone. November 17th, 2025, 2:37 p.m. My 35th birthday. I was alive. I started laughing again, lying there in bed. I'd made it. I'd survived past the day that had killed every Corvinus for 200 years. The curse was broken. There was a knock on my door. "Daniel," Father Gregor's voice, "may I come in?" "Yes." He entered, smiling. "Happy birthday." "It really is," I said. "Father, I'm alive. I made it past November 17th. "You did more than that," Father Gregor said. "You broke a 200-year curse. You accomplished something the Church has been trying to do for generations. You're a miracle, Daniel." Over the next few days, Vatican investigators arrived to verify the binding. They examined the chapel from every angle, interviewed everyone present, analysed the documentary footage. Their conclusion was unanimous. The bloodline tether had been successfully severed and bound. The entity was trapped in a spiritual prison from which it could never escape. Cardinal Dante called me personally. His voice was weak but filled with joy. "Daniel, my boy, you did it. You actually did it." "I had good teachers," I said. "No," Cardinal Dante said. "You had good teachers, yes, but what you did required something we couldn't teach you. Courage, true courage, facing your deepest fear and standing your ground. That came from you alone." We stayed in Romania for another week, ensuring the binding was stable. The chapel was sanctified one final time and then sealed. The Vatican declared it a holy site, a place of victory over darkness. Father Andre promised to maintain it, to ensure no one disturbed the binding. On November 27th, I returned to Rome. Giovanni and his crew came with me, still filming. The documentary was nearly complete. "What are you going to do now?" Giovanni asked me at the airport. I thought about it. "I have no idea," I admitted. For 27 years, my entire life has been focused on breaking the curse. Now that it's broken, I have to figure out who Daniel Corvinus is when he's not preparing to fight a demon. "That's a good problem to have," Giovanni said, smiling. When I arrived back at Vatican City, a small crowd was waiting. Priests who'd known me since childhood, Dr. Navarro, other residents of the building where I'd grown up. They applauded when they saw me, some crying, all of them smiling. Dr. Navarro hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Daniel." "Thank you," I said, "for everything, for keeping me sane all these years." "You kept yourself sane," she said. "I just gave you a safe space to process. But Daniel, we need to talk about your future. You've spent your entire life preparing for one moment. Now that moment has passed. You need to decide what comes next." Over the following weeks, I had many conversations with Dr. Navarro about my future. She helped me understand that I was essentially starting my adult life at 35. I'd never had a normal job, never lived independently in the regular world, never had a relationship. I'd been training to be a spiritual warrior since I was 7. "It's okay not to have answers immediately," she told me. "Give yourself time to adjust, time to discover who you are now that you're free." In December, I made a decision. I would leave Vatican City. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because I needed to experience the world I'd never really been part of. Cardinal Dante understood. "You've earned your freedom," he said. "Use it well." I moved to Florence in January, enrolling at the university to study history. It felt strange being in classes with people a decade younger than me, but I loved it. Loved learning about things that weren't related to demons or curses. Loved having professors who didn't know about my past. I made friends, real friends. People who invited me to parties and study groups. People who didn't know I'd spent my childhood training to fight supernatural entities. To them, I was just Daniel, a slightly older student with an interesting background. In February, I met someone, Sophia, different from the Vatican librarian, with the same name, but somehow just as special. She was studying Renaissance art, passionate and brilliant and completely unaware of who I used to be. We met in a bookstore. I was browsing history texts when she asked if I'd read a particular book on Medici politics. We started talking. She mentioned a cafe she liked. I suggested we go there. It was my first real date. At 35 years old, I went on my first date. It was terrifying and wonderful. We talked for 3 hours about art and history and life. She told me about growing up in Naples. I told her I'd grown up in Vatican City, which she thought was fascinating. I didn't tell her why. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not on the first date. When I walked her home, she kissed me on the cheek and said she'd like to see me again. "I'd like that too," I said, smiling like an idiot. That night, I called Dr. Navarro to tell her about it. "Daniel, I'm so happy for you," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "This is exactly what you deserve. A normal life, normal experiences, normal happiness." "It doesn't feel normal to me," I admitted. "It feels miraculous. Every day I wake up past November 17th feels like a gift." "That's not a bad way to live," Dr. Navarro said, "treating every day as a gift. Most people take their lives for granted. You never will." In March, I visited my mother's grave in Rome. I brought flowers and sat beside her headstone for a long time. "I did it, Mum," I told her. "I broke the curse. You can rest now. All the Corvinus can rest. It's over." I told her about my life in Florence, about my classes, about Sophia, about learning to be a normal person. "I wish you could have had this," I said quietly, "a chance to live without fear. But I promise I'll live enough for both of us. I won't waste this second chance." In April, Giovanni called to tell me the documentary was finished. It would premiere at a film festival in May, then be released to streaming platforms worldwide. Cardinal Dante had approved it for public release, hoping it would help others dealing with curses or spiritual warfare. "Would you like to see it before the premiere?" Giovanni asked. "Yes," I said. He sent me a private link. That evening, alone in my apartment in Florence, I watched the documentary from beginning to end. It was strange seeing my life from the outside. The 7-year-old boy who'd lost his mother, the training montages spanning years, the interviews with priests and experts, the historical reenactments of my ancestors' deaths, all of it building toward that night in the chapel. Giovanni had kept the ritual footage minimal, showing just enough to convey what happened without being exploitative. When it got to the part where I sealed the binding with my blood, where I spoke those final words, I found myself crying, not from sadness, but from relief, from seeing visual proof that it was real, that it had happened, that I'd survived. The documentary ended with footage of me 6 months later, walking through Florence, laughing with friends, living. The final title card said, Daniel Corvinus lives in Florence, Italy, where he is studying history and experiencing the life he fought so hard to win. It was perfect. The premiere in May was surreal. Walking a red carpet, sitting in a theatre with hundreds of people, watching them react to my story. After the screening, there was a kanda. People asked questions about the curse, about the training, about how I'd found the courage to face the entity. I didn't feel courageous, I admitted. I felt terrified, but I'd spent 27 years preparing, and I knew that running wouldn't help. So I stood my ground. And sometimes standing your ground even when you're terrified is all courage really is. The documentary became more popular than anyone expected. It won awards at festivals. It trended on streaming platforms. People from around the world reached out, some dealing with their own curses or hauntings, asking for advice. I tried to help when I could, connecting them with Vatican resources or other experts. I lived through something extraordinary, and if that experience could help others, then all those years of training had an even greater purpose. But mostly I focused on living, on being normal, on making up for all the experiences I'd missed. Sophia and I grew closer. After a few months of dating, I told her the truth about my childhood, about the curse, about what I'd done in that chapel. I showed her the documentary. She watched it in silence, then looked at me with tears in her eyes. Daniel, she said quietly, I don't even know what to say. You've been through so much. It's over now, I said. That part of my life is finished. I'm just Daniel now, a student, a regular person. You'll never be just regular, she said, taking my hand. But I'm glad you want to try. In November, as my 36th birthday approached, I felt nervous. I knew intellectually that the curse was broken. The entity was bound. I'd lived an entire year past my supposed death date. But some part of me still expected something to happen on November 17th. It didn't. It was just a day. A good day, actually. Sophia made me a cake. My friends from university took me out for dinner. It was the first birthday party I'd ever had. At midnight, when November 17th became November 18th, I felt something settle in my chest. Final proof. Final acceptance. I was free. Now it's February 2026. I'm 35 years old, and I've been alive for 15 months, past the day I was supposed to die. Every morning, I wake up and remember that I get to live this day, that I have a future. I'm still studying history at the university. I'm thinking about pursuing a doctorate, maybe teaching someday. Sophia and I are talking about moving in together. I have friends who text me memes and invite me to movies. I have a life. Dr. Navarro and I still talk weekly, though our conversations have shifted from survival strategies to normal life challenges. How to balance school and relationships. How to manage money. How to plan for a future I never thought I'd have. You've come so far, Daniel, she told me in our last session. From a traumatized 7-year-old to a thriving young man. I'm so proud of who you've become. I couldn't have done it without you, I said, without all of you. Father Gregor, Father Ambrose, Cardinal Dante, everyone who trained me and believed in me. They gave you tools, Dr. Navarro said, but you chose to use them. You chose to fight. That was all you. Cardinal Dante died in December. He was 91. I flew back to Rome for the funeral. Hundreds of priests attended, all of them praising his dedication to spiritual warfare and his lifetime of service to the church. But I knew him differently. I knew him as the man who took in a frightened child and gave him hope, who dedicated his final years to preparing me for a battle most people thought was impossible to win. At the funeral, I placed my mother's rosary in his casket. He'd given me so much. It seemed right that he should be buried with something that connected us. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything, for giving me a chance, for believing a cursed child could break a 200-year pattern. You were right to believe. I hope you knew that before you died." Father Gregor pulled me aside after the funeral. "Cardinal Dante left something for you," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a letter in Cardinal Dante's shaky handwriting, dated November 20th, 2025. "My dear Daniel," it read, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm writing this just days after you broke the Corvinus curse, while the joy of that victory is still fresh in my heart. I want you to know that in my 50 years of serving the Church, in all the cases I've worked on, and all the people I've helped, you are my greatest pride. Not because you broke the curse, though that is remarkable, but because of who you are, the man you've become despite everything you've endured. You could have been broken by your childhood. You could have become bitter, angry, twisted by the knowledge of your doom. Instead, you became strong, compassionate, determined. You faced ultimate evil and refused to surrender. But now comes the harder part. You have to learn to live, to be happy, to let go of the trauma and embrace the future. That will take a different kind of courage, but I believe you have it. Live, Daniel, live fully, love deeply, experience everything you were denied. Make every day count, not because you're making up for lost time, but because life itself is precious. You've earned your peace. Take it, embrace it, and know that wherever I am, I'm watching over you and smiling. With love and pride, Cardinal Francesco Dante." I cried reading that letter. Ugly, gasping sobs in the middle of a Vatican hallway. Father Gregor waited patiently until I finished, then embraced me. "He loved you like a son," Father Gregor said quietly. "I loved him like a father," I replied. Now, as I sit here in my apartment in Florence, finishing this recording, I think about everything I've been through. The curse that stalked my family for 200 years. The childhood spent training to break it. The terror of facing something that had killed everyone who came before me. The joy of surviving. The struggle to build a normal life. If you're watching this documentary, if you followed my story this far, I want you to know something. Curses can be broken. Patterns can be shattered. Evil can be defeated. It's not easy. It might take everything you have, but it's possible. I was raised by the Vatican to kill a demon, and I did. But that's not the end of my story. That's not even the most important part anymore. The most important part is what came after. Learning to live without fear. Learning to trust that tomorrow will come. Learning to love someone and believe they'll still be there. Next week, next month, next year. Learning that I'm more than just the curse that defined my family for generations. Some nights I still wake up suddenly, heart racing, certain that something is in the corner of my room. But now when I turn on the light, I don't just see emptiness. I see Sophia sleeping beside me. I see textbooks on my desk for classes I'm taking. I see a calendar on the wall with plans written in for months ahead. I see a life. The entity showed me horrible things in that chapel. It tried to convince me that I was broken, worthless, defined only by fear and anger. But it was wrong. Yes, I was afraid. Yes, I was angry. Yes, I carried trauma that shaped who I became. But I was also brave. I was also determined. I was also capable of love and hope and faith, even when everything seemed hopeless. The curse didn't define me. Breaking it didn't define me. What defines me is what I choose to do with this life I fought so hard to win. Last week, Sophia asked me if I ever regretted my childhood. If I wished I could have grown up normal without the curse, without the training. I thought about it carefully before answering. I can't regret it, I told her, because if I hadn't gone through it, I wouldn't be who I am now. And I like who I am. I like the person I'm becoming. The curse was horrible. Losing my mother was horrible. Growing up knowing I'd probably die at 35 was horrible, but it also taught me things most people never learn. That life is precious, that fear can be overcome, that standing your ground matters even when you think you'll lose. She kissed me then. I'm glad you're who you are too. That's what I want people to take from this. Not just that I broke a curse, but that trauma doesn't have to destroy you. That you can face the worst and still come out the other side. That there's life after survival and it can be beautiful. I'm 35 years old and I'm learning to ride a bike. I never learned as a child because what was the point? I'd be dead by 35 anyway. But last month, Sophia taught me. I fell a dozen times, scraped my knees like a kid, and when I finally managed to ride down the street without falling, I started laughing so hard I almost crashed. These are the moments I'm living for now. The small, ordinary, beautiful moments I never thought I'd have. I'm taking a cooking class. I'm terrible at it, but I'm learning. Father Ambrose trained me to fight demons, but nobody trained me to make pasta from scratch. Turns out that's a different kind of challenge. I'm thinking about getting a dog. I've never had a pet, never had anything I was responsible for caring about long term. But now I can. Now I can adopt a dog and know I'll be there to take care of it for years. These sound like small things. Bikes and pasta and dogs. But to me, they're everything. They're the life I never thought I'd live. The documentary will be released worldwide next week. People will watch my story. Some will think it's impressive, fighting a demon and breaking a curse. Some will think it's scary. Some will think it's inspiring. But I hope, more than anything, that people see the message underneath it all. Life is worth fighting for. Not just survival, but actual living. Laughing with friends, falling in love, learning new things, making mistakes, getting up after you fall. All of it. Every Corvinus before me died in terror, killed by something they couldn't defeat. But their deaths weren't meaningless. They're part of why I succeeded. Each generation passed down knowledge, documentation, determination. My mother's decision to have me, knowing what awaited our family, gave me the chance to end it. Lucian's detailed journal gave me the information I needed. Every failed attempt taught the church something new. I stood on the shoulders of 16 dead Corvinus when I faced that entity. I carried their hopes, their fears, their determination. And when I sealed that binding with my blood, I freed not just myself, but everyone who comes after. There will be no more Corvinus cursed to die on November 17th. The pattern is broken forever. That's legacy. That's purpose. That's what makes all of it worth it. Father Gregor calls me every month to check in. Last time we talked, he asked if I'd consider working with the Vatican as a consultant, not full-time, not moving back, but helping with other cases. Families dealing with curses, people facing supernatural threats. You have knowledge and experience no one else has, he said. You could help people who are where you were. Give them hope. I told him I'd think about it. And I am thinking about it. Maybe that's part of my purpose going forward. Not as a full-time demon hunter, but as someone who broke a curse and can help others do the same. But first, I need to finish becoming myself. The Daniel who exists outside of the curse. The one who has hobbies and dreams and plans that have nothing to do with spiritual warfare. I'm reading novels for fun now. Fiction. Stories about people living normal lives, falling in love, having adventures that don't involve demons. It's wonderful. For 27 years, my reading was all theology, demonology, ancient languages, case studies. Now I'm reading mystery novels and romance and science fiction just because I enjoy them. I'm learning to play guitar. Badly. Very badly. My neighbours probably hate me. But I'm learning, and someday I'll be able to play actual songs instead of just noise. I'm travelling. Last month, Sophia and I went to Venice for a weekend. Just a normal couple taking a normal trip. We rode on gondolas and ate gelato and got lost in the narrow streets. It was perfect. No demons, no curses, just us. That's the life I'm building. Normal, beautiful, mine. People who knew me as a child, who watched me train for years, sometimes seem surprised that I'm so determined to be ordinary now. They expected me to stay in spiritual warfare, to become a legendary exorcist, to build on what I accomplished. But I did my part. I fought my battle. I broke my curse. Now I want to live the life I fought for. That doesn't mean I'm forgetting where I came from. I still pray. I still attend Mass when I can. I still carry my mother's rosary in my pocket every day. I still remember everyone who helped me become who I am. But I'm also eating pizza with friends. I'm also staying up too late studying for exams. I'm also arguing with Sophia about which movie to watch. I'm also living. There's a Corvinus family Bible that's been passed down through generations. After I broke the curse, Father Gregor gave it to me. It contains birth and death records going back to Lucian. I've started a new page in that Bible. Not deaths, lives. Daniel Corvinus, born November 17th, 1990. Broke the family curse November 16th, 2025. Lives in Florence, Italy. Studies history. Loves Sophia Marchetti. Learning to play guitar. Terrible at cooking. Good at making friends laugh. Survived. Living. Someday maybe that Bible will record my children. The first Corvinus in 200 years who can have children without cursing them to die at 35. The first who can build a family without fear. But I'm not thinking about that yet. Right now, I'm focused on being 35 and alive and figuring out who Daniel Corvinus is when he's not defined by a curse. The answer, I'm discovering, is that he's just a guy. A guy with an unusual past, yes, but still just a guy who wants what everyone wants. To be happy, to be loved, to matter to someone, to make a difference in small, everyday ways. I volunteer at a youth centre in Florence now, helping kids with their homework. None of them know about my past. They just know me as Daniel, the slightly awkward tutor who's really good at history and really bad at math. One kid, Marco, asked me last week why I was so patient with him when he kept making the same mistakes. Because mistakes are how we learn, I told him. I've made more mistakes than you can imagine, but each one taught me something. That's what makes you stronger. He smiled and went back to his work, and I realized that's what I want to do with my life now. Help people, not by fighting demons or breaking curses, but by being present, by being patient, by showing up, and that's the victory, isn't it? Not just surviving the dramatic battle, but living the quiet days after. Not just breaking the curse, but building something beautiful in its place. This recording is getting long. I should probably wrap it up, but there's one more thing I want to say. If you're dealing with something that seems impossible, if you're cursed or haunted or trapped in a pattern you can't break, if you're living in fear of something you think is inevitable, fight, plan, prepare, get help, learn everything you can, build your strength, shore up your weaknesses, and when the moment comes, stand your ground. But also remember that breaking the curse is only the beginning. What comes after is just as important. Learning to live without fear, learning to trust in tomorrow, learning to be more than your trauma. You are not your curse, you are not your fear, you are not defined by the worst thing that's happened to you, or the worst thing you're afraid will happen. You are whoever you choose to become after you survive. I was raised by the Vatican to kill a demon. I did. And now I'm learning to be so much more than that. I'm a student. a boyfriend, a friend, a terrible cook and a worse guitar player, someone who laughs too loud at jokes and cries at sad movies, someone who's still figuring things out, someone who's alive and grateful for every single day. That's who Daniel Corvinus is now. And it's enough, more than enough. It's everything. Tomorrow, Sophia and I are going to a museum. Next week, I have exams. Next month, we're thinking about taking a trip to Greece. Next year, who knows? Maybe I'll finish my degree. Maybe I'll get that dog. Maybe Sophia and I will take the next step in our relationship. I have a future full of maybes, and that's the most beautiful thing in the world. This is Daniel Corvinus, signing off. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring. And if you're fighting your own battle right now, know that I'm rooting for you. Break your curse, face your fear, stand your ground, and then live. Really, truly live. Because that's what makes it all worth it. That's what makes you more than your trauma. That's what turns survival into victory. I'm 35 years old. I've been alive for 15 months, past my death date. And I'm just getting started. The curse is broken. The demon is bound. The Corvinus family is free. And Daniel Corvinus, for the first time in his life, gets to simply be. That's the happy ending I fought for. That's the life I'm living now, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. End recording. The documentary ends with footage of me walking through Florence on a sunny afternoon. Sophia beside me, laughing at something I said. We stop at a cafe, order coffee, sit in the sun. Just two people living an ordinary moment on an ordinary day. The final shot holds on my face as I smile, relaxed and happy and alive. The weight I carried for 27 years is gone. The fear is gone. The curse is gone. What remains is just life. Beautiful, messy, ordinary life. And that's the real miracle. Not that I killed a demon, but that I survived to have coffee on a Tuesday afternoon in Florence with someone I love. That I get to have Tuesdays. That I get to have afternoons. That I get to have tomorrows. The screen fades to black. The words appear. The Corvinus curse was broken on November 16th, 2025. Daniel Corvinus continues to live in Florence, Italy. This is his story. May it give hope to all who fight battles others cannot see.